So today, instead of going over one topic quite largely and quite thoroughly, we're actually going to do 5 topics that we're going to touch on for 5 quick tips for how to make your worlds feel more medieval. Now, as always, you can take anything you like away from this, but this is to make your medieval worlds feel that bit more medieval and that bit more historical. So we're going to start off by looking at colour, because despite what medieval movies would have you believe, the medieval world was bright and colourful. If anything, more so than today's fashions, which are often still based around Victorian culture and design aesthetics. Throughout the medieval era, wearing bright clothes was a sign of wealth, so nobles would show off by wearing the brightest colours they could, and even peasants would have access to dyes and would dye their clothes. Pale blue, green and yellow would all be available even to peasants, whilst richer reds, oranges and darker blues would be available to the lords and nobles. And whilst yes, there were some laws that supposedly restricted what colours who could wear, there seems to be little evidence to suggest that these were ever really enforced, and were mostly just deemed to be mostly precautionary. But it's more than just clothing. Even buildings were far more colourful than we tend to imagine. When you think of medieval buildings, you usually picture grey stone and those wattle and daub homes you see at the beginning of Braveheart, with those little thatched roofs, all muddy streets and dirt and grime. But that is far from the truth. In fact, stone buildings that you see today, that's not what they really looked at the time. See, at the time they were built, used and maintained, they were covered in white plaster. Like, just imagine the splendour of approaching a medieval city or town with its city walls painted in white plaster. How it would shine on the landscape and almost seem like this beacon for the places around it. And whilst, yes, obviously white plaster would get dirty over time, this is a time for a lot of smog, so air pollution was a lot less, and often plaster would have been applied fairly regularly, so they would have remained clean. But it's more than just that. Often city walls and walls of large stone structures were painted in decorations and paintings, and none of this is more true than within temples themselves. Medieval churches weren't bare stone and cold. They were warm, painted in depictions of the Bible everywhere. Just imagine what a fantasy temple might look like if it took inspiration from this. Bright white plaster with images of the gods painted directly onto the walls. The second thing I would recommend looking at in your own medieval fantasy worlds is the role that clerics play. In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church played multiple fundamental roles to society. One of the first and most important was that of writing and education. Before the invention of the printing press, almost all books and manuscripts were handwritten by monks and members of monastic orders. Even at the founding of the universities, these were largely religiously led. They were also responsible for healing the sick and the wounded, the running of hospitals. Local priests were also the centre of local charity. It was the duty of all good Christians to donate to your church, and the church would in turn give this to the most needy within your society. But it was far more than just amenities that the Catholic Church ran. They were also massive landowners in their own right, owning massive swaths of land throughout medieval Europe, meaning not only did they have very real economic power, they had political sway. In fact, many bishops would raise armies to fight beside their feudal counterparts. I will probably do a full video on religious feudalism at some point, but I'll leave this for now. Main thing to take away from this segment is to really consider the major role that the organised religious societies within your fantasy world play.
But I would like to take a moment out of this video to say that if aesthetics and themes are as important at your table as they are at mine, then why should that stop at world building? Whether you're a halfling looking for your perfect set, a dragon wanting to add to your horde, or a goblin grabbing any math rocks you can, Only Crits has you covered. Whether you're looking for resin, metal, or even gemstone dice, Only Crits has a massive range of genuinely amazing dice for you to look through. I personally have this Seaweed Tangle Stone dice set, which absolutely sets the tone for my table. And if you simply can't get enough dice, you can sign up to their mystery dice set subscription, meaning you can get a brand new set of dice every month, 2 months, or 3 months at a massively discounted rate. So if you're looking for great looking dice that won't break the bank, check out Only Crits using the link below and use the code HALFLINGSROCK for an additional 10% off at checkout, and in doing so you'll help support the channel. So anyway, back to the video.
And for our third point, we are still going to be continuing with religion, but I assure you not all these points are around religion. But the third one I think you need to consider is pilgrimage. Now, according to Christian belief, and especially during the medieval era, it was the role of every good Christian to go on pilgrimage at least once in their life. Now, for most people, this would mean going to your local city and going to one of the cathedrals there or visiting some holy relics. For the rich, this might mean going further, maybe even taking a trip to Rome itself, and in the case of some knights, going on crusade, which might seem odd for us nowadays, but many consider to be an armed pilgrimage, which is weird, but it's how it was viewed at the time. Going on pilgrimage was a way of proving your faith and showing your willingness to your God. Now, what these pilgrimages look like is debatable. Some historians have argued how sincere and how proper these pilgrimages were. Others have argued that it was an excuse for many peasants to go out, get out and get drunk in many neighbouring towns. The truth probably lies somewhere between the two, with people probably going for religious reasoning, but taking an excuse to have a couple of pints on the way out. But what isn't up for debate was how important pilgrimages were to cities and local economies. Essentially, pilgrimages were an early form of the tourist trade, in which towns would become rich by charging pilgrims nights to stay at their inns, and would even offer souvenirs that they could buy to take home to prove that they'd gone on pilgrimage. Like this is what early fridge magnets look like. This is the precursor to the fridge magnet or the postcard. But this is also why things like holy relics were so important to many cities. If a city suddenly found some holy relics from an ancient saint, suddenly thousands of pilgrims from all over Europe would come visiting and would bring their coin purses with them. My next point, and moving a bit away from the religious elements of medieval Europe, is public punishments. Now, I'm sure you've all heard of the stocks and the pillories, and whilst I'm sure most of you probably know, this is a stock and this is a pillory. They are slightly different, but bear them in mind, because there'll always be one person at your table who will know this and will correct you. Me, I'm that person. If you ever do that, I don't care if you're the DM. If you do that and make that mistake, I will be correcting you. But in the medieval era, prisons weren't really a thing. Punishments for crimes were normally quick and often brutal. For mild misdemeanors like public drunkenness or vandalism or fighting, you might get locked in the stocks or the pillory, made to stand there for a day to show to everyone what crime you have committed. This essentially worked as a form of public shaming. Is that you didn't want all your neighbours being aware that you were getting up to no good, and so this would work as a punishment for these often minor misdeeds so that they wouldn't be repeated in the future. But for more serious crimes, punishments got a lot more brutal. But this idea of public shaming and public marking remained. Branding was a very common form of punishment, that if you were, say, a thief or a poacher, you might get branded, which would be a permanent physical mark on your body that would show to everyone that you are a criminal. One such example is perjury, so lying in court. If you were a perjurer, you would have a P burnt into your forehead. Imagine trying to get a job or trying to defend someone in court when you literally have liar printed across your forehead. And yes, this type of public punishment did also exceed to the death penalty in hangings and beheadings being reserved for nobility. And you may be thinking, Well, why didn't they use prisons? And well, the fact of the matter is, it's expensive. The only people that you would keep in captivity for a prolonged amount of time were nobles. Normally the nobles that if you were a knight, you'd captured in battle and were awaiting their release. In truth, his prison sentences were long. You had to continue paying for the person's food and upkeep, and it wasn't really worth it. So, quick public punishment, have the public shame be the main point of it, and you're done. And my final point on how to make your world feel more medieval is agriculture. Now, it may not be the most exciting topic to most people, but agriculture is a key part of both medieval society and its economy. What you need to know about medieval society is that the vast majority of people work directly on the land, and most other people, even lords, got most of their income from the agriculture that their peasants farmed on their lands for them. It's no coincidence that normally the richest people in the kingdom were the people who own the most land. Usually there was a direct correlation between the more land you owned, the more money you were able to make because you had more farmland. Now, of course, there are some exceptions. Banks existed, merchants existed, especially in a lot of like the city-states of like Italy. But even then, and even in these locations, the vast majority of people still work in agriculture. Now, it might be really easy to overlook this when your party are dealing with knights and merchants and guildsmen, but don't forget about the farmers and the yeomen who work the land. They're just as important, if not a more important part of society than many others. So don't forget to include them in your world building and in your D&D in general. Now, this doesn't mean you have to go over the top and think about, in great detail, what type of things are farmed where, what breeds of sheep you have in what locations. I mean, I have in my fantasy world, but I'm weird. Don't do that. It's a terrible waste of time. But seriously, just maybe do give it a little bit of a think about like what type of crops or what types of animals are bred and grown in which locations, and they might have a bigger impact on your world building than you might otherwise think. But those are my top 5 things to consider when creating your own medieval fantasy world. Again, I could potentially talk about any of these things in a full-length video, and if you are interested in hearing more specifics or the reasoning behind any of these, please comment below and I will hope to include it sometime in the future. Next video should be out normal time, and we are covering a controversial topic, so keep an eye out for that. But for now, I'm Billy Halfling, and thank you for listening.